We're going to spend some time talking about, again, some of the configurable options that relates to customers and vehicles as we go through. We're going to kind of jump back and forth a little bit, meaning we're going to start down the path of creating a new customer and a new vehicle, and we're going to, as we go through, stop at different points and go ahead and look at some of the configurable settings that are available therein. At the top of the screen, we're just going to start a brand new estimate. When I start that new estimate, the customer is going to be a new customer. So in this case, we're going to click on New Customer in the lower right-hand corner, and we get into the Edit Vehicle window. You notice we're looking for a first name, last name, and/or business name, as well as an address, city, state, zip. To the upper right-hand corner, we'll put in the phone number information, and last but not least, the email configuration. There are actually a number of different configuration windows that play around with this particular screen here. The first one would be down here in the lower left-hand corner where it says address. By default, it comes up with the location of my shop, zip code 33412, Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. You have the ability to define what information comes up, if any, by default. And it also plays into the address, or I'm sorry, the area code that gets associated with phone numbers. So I'm going to jump over to the configuration module, and we're going to go take a look at where that comes into play. In the configuration module, underneath the configuration header, we're going to be in a number of different submenus under this configuration header as we go along, starting with underneath customer. And if you'll notice, the very first one says customer information. And we're going to get to zip codes and edit phone email fields here in just a moment. But when I come back in here to the customer information, what you'll notice is a couple of different configurable settings. In my case, what we saw just there was, here's the default city, state, zip, and area code that gets associated with the customer as we're adding a new customer by default. Again, in my case, my shop in 33412, Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. So that's a majority of my customers that are stopping by or we're adding into the system. So hence, the system is going to default to those. As we're going through, we can require a tax ID when making a customer tax exempt, as well as if I'm just doing primarily fleet work, and I always wanted to start in the business name field as opposed to the customer's first and last name fields, I could have the system default to the business name as I'm entering a new customer. So the first configurable setting as we're walking through customers and vehicles is what's my default city, state, zip, and area code. So if I jump back over onto the RO Writer side, again, what we're really talking about is as I clicked on new customer, this field, this field, this field, and then our 6 area codes as we go through. There were 2 other options or 2 other menu items as we went through. One of them was to talk about to configure the phone fields and the email addresses. The other one was to configure the zip codes. So if we went back and looked over on the configuration side, the way the zip codes work is when I typed in, let's say 33410 as a zip code, it says, well, that is Lake Park, Florida. And if I was to drop my window down, not just Lake Park, but also North Palm Beach, Palm Beach Gardens, and West Palm Beach as well. And oh, by the way, the area code that's associated with each is 561. If I was to put in a different zip code, let's say 60525, which is beautiful LaGrange Highlands, Illinois, it's also, in addition to LaGrange Highlands, 60525, a 708 area code. So it's now brought that over as we go along as well. Now, if I went back onto the configuration side, I'm going to get out of my customer information defaults. And underneath customers and vehicles, configuration customer is where we're heading. We're going to go down to zip codes as the next place we're going to stop. And here, if I put in 33410, notice it does show that it's Lake Park, Florida. It also is North Palm, Palm Beach, and then also West Palm Beach. If I needed to add or modify or remove any of the items from this list, again, there's my options down at the bottom. If I wanted to clear that out, delete it from my list, add a new one, and or change. So if it was, you know what, they've changed the primary area code for a particular location, then we can change as we go through. If I said, well, let's make West Palm Beach, and we'll just say that the area code for that's now going to be 123. And I clicked on Save. When I come back into our writer, and I said, well, let's look at 33410, I can now see that there's my same list. When I select West Palm Beach, you'll notice my default area code changes as we go through. So again, what's in the list, and then what area code is associated, as we go through, we can adjust as we see fit. The other configurable option underneath that customer section is our phone and email fields, meaning you'll notice mine are called cell home, cell 2, work spouse, other, and then email 1, 2, and 3. Not by default, but if I was to go into configuration customer and edit phone/email fields, again, there you'll see that phone 1, or the first phone number, is called cell. Phone 2, home, so on and so forth on down the line. Email 1, email 2, email 3. If I wanted that to be work, home, home 2 or something along those lines, I could go ahead and I could check those boxes as well. One question that we get with some degree of frequency is, well, by default, a lot of shops have the home number in the first position and the cell number in the second. Nowadays, by a wide margin, the most common phone number you'll get will be the cell phone number, not the home number. So I'd like to switch and put that in the first position as opposed to the second. You can switch the name, however, it doesn't switch the data. What I mean by that is, if I just changed the name of the field from home to cell and vice versa, the data behind the scenes wouldn't move along with it. You would actually have to go into the data and write some queries in order to move that. If you'd like to go through that exercise, I'd encourage you to start by reaching out to support. They'll likely redirect you to our professional services group to assist in that endeavor. But you do have the ability to name your phone and email fields as we go through. So I'm going to click on cancel and then go back over to our writer. So again, your configurable options are primarily driven around the defaults and then what we name these, as well as what comes up associated with the zip code for a particular area code as we go through. In this case, we'll add in my customer John. We'll put him at 1234 Main Street as we go through. One other piece to note, and we'll go take a look at it here when we're towards the end of our conversation, but you'll notice that address was lit up in red and now is in black. Phone number lit up in red, and if I was to put in a phone number, it now is in black. And that's driven by the entries that we're requiring, meaning what information am I mandating be populated before I can finalize a transaction. We'll go take a look at where that gets configured as we finish up our conversation this morning. Click on OK as we've entered in our customer information. It brings me into my vehicle information. Now again, in here, a handful of different configurable options as well. Starting with, where do we actually start in this window? In my case, it's typing or wanting me to put in year, make, model, and engine. We could also have it start in the VIN number field if we saw fit. Over on the right-hand side, we're going to talk about our mileage options as we continue through this window, and then down towards the bottom where it says additional vehicle information, you'll notice I've got a handful of fields here. We have the ability to modify exactly what these fields look like. Last but not least, you'll notice plus keys down here on the right-hand side of each, or not each, but the year, make, model, engine, the make, model, engine, and transmission, because I can add in items or elements into those drop-down boxes. So if I'm working on, I don't know, let's say medium or heavy-duty trucks, I'm doing trailers or Winnebagos or high-end luxury cars that don't appear in that list as a standard, I can add those in as well. As you might expect on the configuration side, most of this controlled underneath configuration. We're going to skip over parts and labor to get down to vehicles. You'll notice edit makes, models, engines, transmissions, and then also field names at the bottom. I'm going to skip to the bottom and start with field names, and then we'll go back up and talk a little bit about make, model, engine, and trans. Inside of the field names, you'll notice that I can change the captions on any of the different fields. Again, I've got all these different fields that are there by default, and these will be the options that are using. If I clicked on defaults, what you'll notice is other 1, other 2, and other 3 go away. We don't have a predefined purpose for those inside of our writer. If we leave those blank, then if I look back at our writer, you'll see in my case, I had them as fields where I could capture the color, whether they had locking hubcaps and or 4-wheel drive. If we leave those blank, those fields will suppress or go away. If there's not a purpose for me to capture information into a field, it has no business being there for users to type in. So again, if I was to leave those blank, what you'll notice is color, C-O-L-R, I'm not quite that bad a speller. With other 1, other 2, and other 3, these are fields that we can have printing on estimates or repair orders or invoices. So you are limited in terms of the number of characters, just because of the real estate that we've got available with each of those. So again, other one, other two, and other three, they'll either appear and or go away based upon whether they are or are not configured. Underneath configuration, again, if I go back to vehicles, again, edit makes, edit models, engines, and transmissions. And these kind of daisy chain together. What I mean by that is I could go add a transmission, but until I can assign it to a make, model, and engine, then we may or may not want to start with that value. In this case, if I start with edit makes, now again, most of the makes that are applicable are probably already in my system. So we're going to create one, just call it test. I'm going to give it, as I click on add, pardon me, I'm going to give it a make. So in this case, we'll just make it TES as the abbreviation, and then test as the description. And I'll go ahead and click on save. Now, if I looked at my make dropdown, there's the word test down there at the bottom. Now, if I was to go back and look at our writer, and I look at the make window, again, I've got to first put in the year. How about 05 as a year? And then where the makes end up that are being entered in manually is down at the very bottom of my list. You'll notice them prefixed with an asterisk. In my case, I'm using the Epicor catalog. So the top items that don't have the asterisks as the prefix are coming out of the the Epicor year, make, model, and engine combination. The bottom two that have the asterisks in front are being driven by my local configuration over on the RO Writer side. Back into our edit vehicles, we're going to go down to edit models. And now that I've created test as a model, I can tell it that underneath that, the model that we're going to add is going to be test model, just as an example of seeing where we chain this stuff together. So again, we added a model underneath our make that we created. Again, continuing down the list, I could say, well, let's see what engine sizes should be there. And in this case, if I look at my make, the engine size that we're going to add is going to be a 2.5 liter engine. So again, we'll create that as an engine size underneath this particular make. And then last but not least, if I was to do that underneath vehicles and then to go down to edit transmission, and now again, underneath my test, we're just going to add in automatic as a transmission. So again, if I was to go back to the RO Writer side, and in here I've got my make, which is all the way down to the bottom. Underneath that, there's my model, and then there is my engine, and then there is, last but not least, my transmission. So we can go ahead and we can add each of those. To the right-hand side, you'll see these little plus keys. Anytime you see a plus key inside of RO Writer, it is a shortcut to the configuration screen for that particular drop-down menu. So again, in this case, if I wanted to change any of those, as opposed to having to go to configuration, I could bring up the window for configuration right from here. And there's that same window we just saw a moment ago where I could go ahead and I could edit my vehicle makes. So, all right, so we've got our vehicle descriptions. We've got the ability to edit years, makes, models, and engines. In this case, we're going to go ahead and we're going to continue through and just get to our main window with our estimates and our work in progress. Takes us into what's called our service requests tab, where down at the bottom we have the opportunity to define the services that may be included. Before we get to talking about this window here, a couple of other pieces as far as it relates to starting the new estimate with the customer and vehicle. I had told you that we were going to talk about the required entries. On that customer screen, it wanted an address and it wanted a phone number. That's all controlled underneath configuration, then down to repair order, then over to required entries. So inside of this window here, what you're going to notice is, as it relates to customer and vehicle, with the customer, we can require the address, require a phone number, or require an email. Now you'll notice the little buttons are in different places for the columns of no, yes, and require. The difference in the behavior is no means that we're going to allow you to continue past that field without ever prompting you to enter in information. Yes says I'm going to prompt you to enter in information before you finalize the transaction. However, I will allow you to continue past it. Require says you've got to enter a value into this field here, or else you cannot finalize the transaction. The two most common elements that I would probably say we see used with the yes parameter. The first one would be email. I'd like the system to prompt me to ask the customer for an email address. However, if they decline to provide one, I would prefer to have no information as opposed to inaccurate or dummy information. So therefore, I'll prompt but not require. Same might be true for a VIN number. Again, if I'm capturing VIN numbers on the majority of my vehicles, I'd like to make sure that it's there before we finalize the ticket. However, I won't make it a hard stop to put that information in. So with the customer, it's address, phone number, and email with the vehicle, license, VIN number, the last inspection date, the 3 options, in this case, color, locking hubcaps, and then 4-wheel drive as we go through. So again, the required options section over here in the lower left-hand corner as it relates to customer and vehicle. While we're here in configuration, the other place I want to stop is underneath repair order. And in this case, RO options is going to be the menu that we're looking for. As we're going through, what you'll notice is there's a checkbox here that says start in VIN number field. I made the comment that you could have the system, as opposed to starting in the year when you're doing the vehicle, have it start in the VIN number field. That would be your configurable option there. As we start a new transaction, whether it starts with service requests or it starts with the parts and labor tab, is driven by this checkbox here. As we're starting new transactions, again, you'll notice the section up here says when opening new repair order. Our options, including with the ones that we've seen here, would be whether you wanted to prompt for a repair order number. If you're using a profit center, source, or service writer, you could have it prompt for those as well. Whether you wanted to prompt for a purchase order if the customer is configured to require a PO. And last but not least, if you're going to display AR warnings, accounts receivable balances, when a new customer starts that has an outstanding AR account. So again, in repair order options, it's this upper left-hand corner that's relevant as far as customers, vehicles, and starting a new repair order are concerned. Close back out of here, underneath configuration, continuing on down, you'll notice underneath repair order, there is an option or a window there for mileage options. Now, when we start a new transaction, it inherently takes us into the vehicle window where we could populate a mileage. If I started the transaction for an existing vehicle, then the mileage options box becomes relevant because I haven't had an opportunity to adjust the mileage as we go through. So what it's telling us is, as we go through with the mileage, do I want to use mileage out or mileage in and out? So if you want to capture the odometer reading and segregate it before and after the repair, then we can do mileage in and mileage out. When I'm starting a new repair order, I'm going to prompt for the mileage when I'm opening a new repair order or estimate for a vehicle that's already pre-existing in the system. And if I'd like, I can either keep the current mileage populated and or blank out the value so that each time it requires that the end user enters in a value. Also, when I'm finalizing the repair order, do I want it to prompt me again to validate that mileage, or if I'm using mileage in or out, to make sure I'm capturing the odometer reading as the vehicle leaves the shop? And once again, do we leave it blank or do we require it? So do we leave it blank and or do we keep the existing value that's there? I apologize. I'm reading ahead and I'm going faster than my mouth is following along. Warn if no mileage, we're going to require that. You have to have a mileage in my case before we can finalize a transaction. And then the last, not least, the 2 options here. If I'm using mileage in and out, then I can tell it whether I should print it in the vehicle information or the body of the document. The 2 options or the differences there are, as we're printing a copy of a document, in the upper right-hand corner where we'd print the mileage, we want to have both in and out there and or printed in the body of the document along with, let's say, the parts, labor, payment information, where all of that information would reside. So again, the last window, at least as far as relates to beginning a new transaction, customer and vehicle wise, would be looking at edit customer and edit vehicle information. Last piece that I want to talk about as far as this is concerned is when we go to start that estimate. So if I was to pull John Barlow back up, the tab that we started on was what's called our service requests tab. And again, this service request tab is intended to facilitate the customer intake process, meaning we want to capture as much information as quickly as we can so that we can get on with the business of fixing the car and the customer can get on with the business of getting back to their day. So the two configurable settings or two configurable options in here are really this drop-down menu at the top. And again, this is the most common things that I hear as a customer walks into the shop. So I want to have that pre-canned. I can select from the list, and or maybe I've got, like I said, a paragraph's worth of verbiage I want to include at my discretion. So I could go ahead and I could include that in my customer requests drop-down. If I wanted to have 1 item or 100 items in this list, it is at my discretion. It is configurable by the end user. Second one is this section down at the bottom where it says services. Now this again is one of the primary differences we see between Gen 1 and Gen 2 in this topic or in this conversation. Because in Gen 1, you have the ability to define 6 different services as you come through. That is the limitation. There is no way to expand on that. With Gen 2, we've changed it so that you can have now an unlimited number of services that we're using to add inspection type items onto a transaction. So if I said, well, we're going to do a brake evaluation and an engine diagnosis, all I do is I check each of those boxes, then click on post labor. And what it does is it drops on a labor operation for each onto my transaction. That information is configured underneath configuration. If I was to go down to, in this case, repair order, then towards the bottom where it says service request options. Both of them are configured in one screen. We're going to work it upside down only because as we're looking at it in our writer, the first thing we see is the drop down for the service requests. So if you looked at my list here, these are the requests, and then this is the text. The request title only appears as I'm looking through my list. It's how we can define the sequence, even if they don't alphabetically follow along with the text. This one is a little bit quirky, at least in terms of the way that it behaves. If I wanted to add a new one, all I do is I go down to the very bottom where I'll find an empty line, and I simply add in the request and the text of what we'd like to include. If I'd like to delete one, all I do is I click on the gray box on the left-hand side, and I hit the delete key on the keyboard. That'll take it out there. So no delete box or button to press. It's the keyboard that drives our ability to remove something from this window here. No save as well. As soon as we close this window, it's going to save those changes as we go through. Towards the top, again, similar in Gen 1 and Gen 2, but a little bit of a different configuration look and feel. Now that we've given you the ability to have an unlimited number, we had to obviously give you a little bit more options to configure. In Gen 1, you'd simply have the 6 different buttons, and your options would be, what does the button say? And then what labor, operation, and category does the button add? So no more difficult than just selecting or typing in a name for the button, then selecting category and operation. With Gen 2, again, the same concept. What should the name of it be as we're looking at it on screen? And then what labor, operation, and category should it add? And you'll notice there is this REQD out on the right-hand side. One of the other nuances or new functions with Gen 2 is you have the ability to automatically add a job onto a transaction. So where it says REQD, if I made that yes as required, it would automatically add that job onto a ticket as I started. So if I'm doing the courtesy check with every invoice, then I can tell the system automatically add this line onto the transaction each time we start a new estimate and or repair order. So if I wanted to add one, all I do is I say, well, let's go ahead and let's add one. So our service is going to be, in this case, well, how about a transmission flush? And then the category of service that I want to select, in my case, is going to be under transmission and differential services. And then underneath my operations, it's just going to be, we'll call it the automatic transmission fluid exchange. If I told it it was a required service, now not applicable likely in this case, but you'll notice if I did check that box when I click on add, then now it's got a Y in there as the trans flush is now a required, and or really it's more going to get added by default each time I start a new transaction. So once I close out of this window here, the next time I start a new estimate or repair order, we would see those changes to our service request window. Again, this one's already existing. I'd have to have it go back out and start another new one to see those changes we just made. That brings me into my presentation about configurable settings relative to customers and vehicles, and really a little dabble into the